Welcome to the Spiritual Studies Session 15. We have two topics that bleed together this time. It is miracles and ESP, meaning extrasensory perception. These two topics together are both an attempt to assert the unknown potential of human beings. Everybody has experienced something inexplicable, but most of the time we have very shallow explanations for why. Some of us wish to dig deeper. This talk is definitely for them, and I'm hoping that this talk can also convince those that seem more right-brained that there may be more to us than we currently give ourselves credit. The big example that I want to break out right away is déjà vu. This is something that I believe everybody experiences, and I've noticed in asking several people their explanations as to why. And most of the time you just see a disregard. There is no attempt to answer why they feel this way, this déjà vu. For me in particular, my déjà vus take the flavor of I have dreamed this before. Some people can place it to specific experiences they had as children. Some people claim that it is an experience that they lived in their last life. However, one of the more interesting that I've heard is a lady I know claims that déjà vu is an affirmation for her, that when she experiences it, she believes that she is on the right path of her life, and she keeps track. And when she doesn't experience déjà vu, she starts to question, what can I do to better align myself with this path? So although everybody explains it, of course, or doesn't explain it, science, much like in dreams, would say it's a sort of misfiring. Now, I have to right away kind of criticize science. Far be it from many philosophy readers, it's kind of always their joke to just dog on science. We have definitely made science the new religion of the day. Anything that is claimed within the mainstream seems unquestionable. However, what we are going to see more and more in the future, and we are already beginning to see, is that science has its boundaries. It is not omnipotent. It is not all-knowing. There is much outside of what is understood now and what has been observed so far. For instance, science cannot approach the question of why in more instances than not. Science also can have no information over something that it does not have the equipment to test. We as human beings have inexplicable experiences within ourselves. This is not something that I believe should be so easily disregarded. Now, for instance, a common miracle that people have heard of at some point is when a woman lifted a car, which is 20 times her body weight, to save an individual. Upon being told that she had saved him, that she had lifted this car and brought him to the hospital, she passed out in the realization of what she'd done, and later was only found to be said that I just knew that I needed to do that. Scientifically inexplicable, as we'll be saying over and over again throughout this. One of the big miracles that kind of set the tone for us, very well recorded, 1917, October 13th, some shepherd boys kind of prophesied that near Fatima, Portugal, that a miracle would happen in these fields. And of course, all the secular newspapers just were ridiculing it for months, just dogging on people for believing in this. And according to eyewitnesses, which this is either, depending on what report we're looking at, between 30,000 to 40,000 people, or all the way up to 100,000 people that witnessed this one event, okay? So they were all out there on high noon of this day, October 13th. And after some rain, these dark clouds opened and the sun appeared in what is described as an opaque spinning disk, in the sky. It was significantly less bright, less radiant. It had multicolored lights everywhere, and it was reported to be careening towards the earth in a zigzag pattern. And many people saw this, right, and thought that this was the end of the world. With so many people seeing this, it is utterly inexplicable and not something that can be tested, or what we would call, in a grab bag, ham-fisted fashion, a miracle. By the way, as a side note, in the understanding of what magic is in general paganism, which is a whole nother discussion, it is the matter of belief. If you gain enough people together that have the belief of what they are doing, something will manifest. It is the power of mutual belief, magic. So there's another story that will set the tone for us. This guy, Grayson Kirby, he was thrown out of a demolition derby car in Ruckersville. This is June 2014, so more contemporary, maybe more believable for some people for some reason. He was in a coma. His lungs were completely done. Every bone in his body was broken, like practically every bone, I mean. He had hemorrhages, brain hemorrhages, and multiple strokes. His kidneys were failing. And of course, at this point, they're like, he's going to be a vegetable if he does wake up, right, from this coma. And thousands of people were called upon. And this tremendous community poured their their prayers together, their thoughts and prayers. And this is kind of cliche, right? Like when something terrible is happening, oh, you're in my prayers. But in this case, they had a concentrated and truly tremendous amount of people that were attempting to pray on behalf of Grayson Kirby. And this weird thing, the doctor decided to hook him up to a machine that is usually for transplant patients and not trauma patients. And just miraculously, it worked. And then 10 days after he was brought in, he woke up. And as far as I could see into this story, completely had healed. And he, of course, says, I know that God saved me and that these prayers and believing saved me. Now, many people might be disregarding this right away, but I'm going to be discussing this topic later, and I'll give some more context as to how it can seem a little bit more believable for us. But just to kind of take a page out of Christianity and the Bible and so forth, as a point of respect, it's Matthew 17:20. It says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Now, this seems rather gawky, right? Rather ominous now. Now I have to talk about quantum physics a little bit to give this some more context. So it's a double slit experiment. If you don't know it, you can look more into it. And essentially what it is that the researchers found that in observing quantum particles, that their act of observation, their act of belief of what they were seeing was affecting the quantum particles. This asserts the power to the individual, that the act of looking, that the act of believing has power in manifesting reality. Now, this is where science starts to dissolve a bit, right? Because science is supposed to be this objective knowledge that is separate from our emotions and our consciousness. However, as early as the 1900s, when they were doing these experiments, this has been shown to be untrue. There is a power in belief, there is a power in perception. So now I'm going to give an overall list of the different forms of ESP and the explanations of what they are. And I hope as a listener that some of these will seem a lot more out there, and then some of these you might relate to more. Maybe you ran into somebody who's had a similar experience, or maybe you yourself have experienced such strangeness, or maybe this is all just a curiosity for you in what people believe. But I'm going to start off with some of the harder to swallow ESP terminology. I'm mixing together two different ones. So one is called Apportation, or what people call Teleportation, and Levitation. So Apportation is the ability to undergo materialization or disappearance, or the movement of an object instantaneously. And then, of course, levitation, commonly depicted in witches, right? Which is a curious thing I'm not going to get into, is the ability to float or to fly by mystical means. These, again, are the more hard to swallow ESPs. So the reason why this is so scoffed at nowadays, because, take it back 500 years and this wasn't that nutso. But a lot of the reason why it's so disregarded is because there was so many shysters and fakes in the States and in Europe during the spiritualist movement. People were rigging ways, of hacking ways, of convincing people of apportation. They would produce a rock or flowers for somebody and said that the spirits of the dead gave it to them for them, right? Or they would hook up these wires to make it appear as they're floating to kind of give the seance some more bravado, some more showmanship. So, definitely not saying that wasn't a bunch of fakery there. However, people that stand behind apportation or teleportation say that you can't move big objects, that in this method, which is an ancient method allegedly, you can only do not so dense and smaller objects. So they would acquire small pebbles from a beach across the world, or maybe a cup of water from an area far away, or maybe soil, like some black sand or something like this. If we dig into some more lore, especially in India, there's a lot more here. So this guy's called Swami Ramalingan. And you can look this up. This whole story is from a book called The Life of Swami Ramalingan. There's the story of Swami, who's a kind of, woke master, right? And him and his followers are going to an Ishwara temple. And they are about halfway there, and it just starts pouring rain from the sky. And of course, the followers begin to run. And then Swami's like, hey, dudes, actually, just gather close to me. I've got an idea. And allegedly, in an instant, as the followers report, bam, they were in front of the temple. This is something that Swami would do all the time, apparently, completely without explanation to his followers. This type of travel reminds me of in your dreams. You know, sometimes you kind of just skip to the next location instantaneously. There's not a traveling that happens. This is interesting because you know, maybe there's a way of blending the two together. So in January 30th of 1874, Ramalingam tells everybody that he's going to lock himself in a room, and he told his followers not to open it. And he told them that when they do open it, even though it's against his wishes, that he will not be found in that room. And it took months and months and months, and eventually the government forced to open the room in May. So this was like 3 or 4 months later. And of course, the room was empty with no clues and no way out of the room. This is disappearance, apportation. So it's as if one is dissolving their own body. Now, this sounds strange, but in even the States and in more contemporary examples, there are these stories of there was an Arizona cop that kind of came forward, a retired Arizona cop, that said that there was a certain drive, I think it was alongside the Navajo reservation, where his vehicle skipped time. He did this drive every year, and that this drive he arrived 2 hours too early. He would always leave at the same time. He always had the same schedule. And he claimed that there was a kind of apportation or a teleportation or a bam, time's gone. And he was suddenly in a place where he wasn't before. This is also a very common occurrence that is reported in UFO sightings when they see something strange behind them, and then bam, they are, time has passed and they are far away from where they should be, traveled at a rate that is not humanly possible. This is also maybe made more personable for people in regards to objects appearing and reappearing in people's lives. I know certain individuals that they would have certain stones like lapis lazuli or so forth, and it would disappear. I have a friend who had a lighter that had a specific gopher on it, and she lost it across in Pennsylvania. And when she was living in Colorado, she found it on the ground, if I'm remembering correctly, completely without explanation. This is a teleportation, quantum entanglement, apportation. There's many different words for it. But I'm going to get back to this in a moment, but I got to mention levitation as well, because these two kind of go together in a certain way. And again, this seems strange to us. This seems completely theatrical, but Marco Polo, who is a real person, it's not just a swimming game, right? Was the first Westerner to encounter Buddhist lamas, and he recorded witnessing the act of levitation. They would be meditating, and they would float 2.5 feet off the ground. There are still recordings to this day that you can look up, whether you believe it or not, of this act of levitation. And the lamas have lore that says that, you know, masters can not only levitate, but they can do psychokinesis, they can do telepathy, and they can astral project. And I'll mention all of these later. But, you know, you see these things where these monks walk over hot coals casually, like no biggie, right? Or they can run over water, no biggie. Or you have these guys that are like grappling up a mountain, and here comes the monk just walking casually. Or they'll allow themselves to be stabbed and they're not pierced. Or they'll be meditating and burning oil. Or they'll be in freezing temperatures and they'll be melting these wet rags on themselves. Another guy, Swami Rama, records a monk, you know, that not only could levitate 2.5 feet off the ground, but he would transform a rock into a sugar cube. So again, to a Westerner and our kind of fakery of the spiritualist movement and science ruling over, this is all like, whoa, man, what are you saying? Like, this is all hubbub, right? But in many different traditions, to them there's this concept of the rainbow body, and I believe in India it's the concept of, in the Vedas it's the diamond body, and then there's the divine body, and then I think in Islam it's called the most sacred body or the golden body. And this is a type of way of separating oneself from their physical form, or death via ascension. And in Western religion, there is, this case of, in Judaic texts or in Christianity, where somebody doesn't just die, they ascend. They just kind of go away. So what does this mean? Is this same apportation that I'm mentioning, dematerialization, where they literally fizzle out and they kind of become particles and then filter their way up into the air? Or is this teleportation, where they literally rise up from the ground? In Tibet, they have over 160,000 recorded cases of dissipation upon death. And if we want to tie it to something that is inexplicable in the Western world, there's spontaneous human combustion. What is that about? How does that happen? Science has no explanation, but it seems like it would be the exact same thing, where all of a sudden you're just poof. And call it rainbow body, call it apportation, call it whatever you want, death via ascension. Another case of this being brought to the Western world is this guy Wim Hof, the Iceman. He's setting world records for not freezing to death. He's hanging out in frozen lakes, and he's doing this technique of mind over matter, of asserting heat into his body and surviving climates that he shouldn't. He did a whole marathon barefoot in like the Arctic. Another weird case in the 1600s, this guy Joseph of Cupertino was an Italian saint, and everybody around him said that he was, quote, remarkably unclever. But he would be prone to spontaneous fits of levitation. He would just levitate all of a sudden. And this guy is the patron saint of aviators and air travelers. This is a recorded event in the Western world of a guy that would just start levitating. This isn't witchcraft. This is Christianity right here. He's a saint. Anyway, that's a way of kind of like giving some more context to the two of those, apportation and levitation. And of course, it's something that I've mentioned before, but does belong in the conversation of ESP. It's astral projection and remote viewing. And the two kind of go together, but are different. I'm going to mention it slightly here, but if you want to know more about that, I did talk about it a bit more in my New Age talk. And also there's plenty of information that you can find on the internet and beyond. The CIA recently did a debunking, or they exposed or declassified, that's the word I'm looking for, a number of documents related to this and transcendental meditation. So you definitely have a lot of homework you can do if you want to, if this is interesting to you. But astral projection essentially is the ability for a person to voluntarily separate their consciousness and their body, or in other words, an out-of-body experience. And remote viewing is the kind of meditative choice to go inward, to put yourself into a sort of trance. And this gives you the ability to see distant or unseen things with a sort of extrasensory perception. This has a lot of historical context. You can find it in Hermeticism. You can find it in Theosophy. You can find it among the Rosicrucians in Neoplatonism. The distinction between the astral body and the physical body and the rainbow body, like mentioned before, that the astral plane is the intermediary between the heavens and the earth. There's a lot to dig into here. And even in the Bible, in Corinthians 12:2, it says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in body or out of body, I do not know, but God knows. And such a one was caught up into the third heaven. So a strange kind of references in Ecclesiastes 12:16, it says, before the silver cord is snapped. This is a reference to the cord that holds the astral body to the physical body. So even in Christianity, you're going to find more references to these, to astral projection in a way that makes it seem like it's a part of the Western tradition and not as foreign as people would assume. I can find this idea in Japan, you can find it in Hinduism, you can find it among the Inuit tribe, you can find it in Egypt, and you can find it in any region of the world that practices shamanism. So this is a very old idea. And in recent times, you had this guy, I think it was during the 70s, this guy Uri Geller. He was performing many miraculous acts, of which ultimately appeared to be debunked, but this got the government looking into ESP in certain ways because they thought, or they found, that the Soviets were using forms of ESP for espionage, for learning trade secrets, for spying on them. So in the 80s, they created this thing called Operation Stargate. It started in 1977 with a program called Gondola Wish, and then it moved into another operation called Grill Flame, and then funding was cut, and then it was brought back up, and wham bam, we have Operation Stargate. And this was a government-sanctioned, taxpayer-funded program for many people to get together and remote view or astral project, however you want to define it, so that they could figure out information about the Soviets or anything else for that matter, for purposes generally of espionage. Again, so you think this stuff is so weird, right? ESP, but government had something to do with it. It was ultimately disbanded on paper during the mid-90s, and that's a whole topic to get into, whether it was or it wasn't, or if it just went into darker black budget territory. But as an example of what they would find, a viewer of theirs was able to locate a downed Soviet bomber in Africa, down to like the very location. Another viewer found he called out in 120 days where a Soviet submarine would be with onboard missiles, and then they would later confirm this. There was a wanted criminal that they didn't know where he was in the States, and a viewer was able to locate down to one missing letter the town in Montana where they would apprehend this person. So it didn't always work, and that's the thing that I'm going to have to mention. I probably should talk about it here. When it comes to these ESP things, when it comes to these extrasensory phenomena that human beings can experience, there is a trick about it that I've noticed, this is my personal opinion, that if it is truly unconscious, if it is truly intuitive, then you can trust that whatever information or whatever miracle that is being performed is valid, is genuine. However, when somebody comes forward and they claim to be a master, or they claim to be able to do this consciously, whatever it is, then there's a big red flag. And maybe they could do it sometimes, or maybe they could only do it in ways that they don't intend. But to me, that is the kind of acid test of this. So to move on, more examples. Something that is claimed as an ESP is automatic writing. This is different than free writing. Automatic writing is that a sort of spirit or something outside of body is able to write something. This is kind of captured by a Ouija board. This is kind of like something disembodied, writing something. And of course, as we've discussed in the spiritualist talk, this all started with communication via knocking by spirits, ghosts, apparitions, that eventually worked its way to the Ouija board as a more effective means of communication with the dead, which is technically necromancy, by the way. And this all goes back in America to the Fox sisters. That's the early reference of this kind of automatic writing. And this would be faked a lot during the spiritualist movement of different ways of allegedly the dead writing something for those that were participating in the seance. Now, the distinguishing, I'm not going to give a lot of credit to automatic writing. I don't know anybody, nor could I find a lot to really give it more of a historical context. But when it comes to free writing, this is something that I wholeheartedly believe is a form of channeling. And I will discuss that later when we get to that. But free writing is essentially just the ability to turn yourself off and to write whatever comes naturally. So as a writer, you don't know what is coming as it's coming, and you are reacting just as much to that writing as anybody else. It is completely disassociative to you. This phenomena can be very heated to the point where your hand hurts, because it's all coming out at once in a way that is faster than thought itself. If you want to look into this type of channeling free writing, you need to look up the Voynich manuscript, Voynich, Voynich manuscript, that it was all written in one consecutive swipe. Tremendous book, unexplained book, that by handwriting analysis says that it was all written impossibly in one go without any mistakes. Free writing. Okay, now I'll get back to that later, but I have a few things to cover along the way. So other forms of ESP are divination in all of its forms, and dowsing, which is the ability to locate water with a tool called a dowsing rod. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because my last talk on this channel that I'm posting this to was all about divination. That gives you a lot more context as to what divination is, what it means historically, all the different forms of divination, and gives a lot of talk about palmistry as an example of why we should take divination more seriously as a society. But to encapsulate it for this talk, divination is essentially a way of gaining insight into things, a way of predicting things, a way of seeing deeper into things. A lot of this divination comes involuntarily. When it comes to dowsing, this is something that is written off as pseudoscience, but as my example in the last talk, many times where water could not be found by scientific means, they would call upon the dowsing or the water witchers, and then they would have a tremendous success rate at it. So more credit where it's due. But I just had to mention that for this talk because both of them are a form of ESP and are beyond the scientific paradigm of human capabilities. Now, a big one here that I want to spend some time on are two things: the ESP of an energetic or energy medicine and psychic surgery. Energetic medicine is the ability to heal one's own self or others, and psychic surgery is more about removing a disease or disorder within a small amount of time, immediately, an immediate healing. Now, with both of these, there is something that's gaining a little bit more credibility, culturally speaking, and this is Reiki. Reiki has always been a part of the Eastern world, but you're starting to see it pop up more and more in the Western world. This is healing through energy, and there's many methods that get undertaken. The one that probably has more social cred than any of the others is acupuncture. This is energetic healing. This is alternate medicine. It's interesting because acupuncture is right on the boundary line between what is Western, acceptable, and what is generally declared as foo-foo. It's right in between there. So pretty much anybody is willing to give it a try. However, when it comes to energic healing, I have an argument here that makes it a lot more relatable to people. So, whew, people who get bent up and who have physical disorders claim a few ways of healing themselves. It's as simple as going outside. If someone's inside for too long, if they're always cramped up at an office or whatever, if they go out and hike, they take a walk, they start to feel better. This is energic healing. You have trees, you have the air, you have different animals, you have different flowers, whatever it is, the energy of all the things around you, the environment has a healing effect. I have a friend that had really bad sleep apnea, as many people do, and of course they get these tremendously loud machines in order to help them sleep, but there have been scientific studies to say that people simply just need to go outside once a day, put their bare feet on the ground. So many people have all this lush grass and they do nothing other than mow it. Go outside, put your feet on the ground, and this has been shown to improve people's snoring and sleep apnea. They've gone so far as attaching electrodes into the ground, running the wire all the way into their house and attaching it to their feet as they sleep as a way for them to like experience an actual healing of their snoring disorder. This is called grounding. Look into it if you're curious. People go to celebrate Yule, where they all sing together. They go to different ceremonies, whether pagan or not, or if they're song circles. This is a type of healing. You are connecting with other people. You are connecting with nature. This is energic healing. People feel better. They feel more connected. They feel more wholesome. They feel more conscious. People go to a sweat lodge to pray, to sweat, to do a ceremony. This makes them feel better. It is an act of ceremony. It is an act of energic healing. So this is a very applicable and underwhelmed or underappreciated form of self-medication. Instead of boozing up or instead of taking pills, how about you do something a little bit more wholesome, right? So this is one that I'm especially a bit peeved about. This should be done more. As a more exotic example for Western minds, you have these hospitals that are medicineless in China and in the Eastern world. They're medicineless because these three doctors, it's always three or more, these three doctors gather around somebody who has been diagnosed with something that is incurable. So there is this, there's so many different examples, but an infamous one is one that was recorded of a lady who had bladder cancer, and they were recording her innards with a machine during this time to study scientifically what these doctors were doing. And they were doing a healing via chanting. They were imbibing the energy that you are healed, you are healed. And these monks or whatever, these doctors that you want to call them, through this process that they do, in this chanting and this energic work, you could literally in real time see this cancer on her bladder melting away. Now, this is where I have to talk about placebo. So in pharmaceuticals and in medicine, they just assume placebo is a thing. They don't question why it works. They don't question how it works. They just know that it does work and they don't know why. This has everything to do with belief, as I mentioned before in the quantum physics studies of the double split experiment, how we are participating in reality. We are participating. We aren't just observers of the objective world. The act of belief has an effect on the physical world. So in this way, faith healing and that first miracle I was talking about all those people praying for that guy who got all his bones broken and his lungs collapsed and all of that, there is a reality to that. There is a proof to that. That belief, call it placebo, call it just like witchcraft or whatever you want to call it Eastern woo-woo, but it's worked for people. So if you don't believe, and then you believe that the Western medicine is the only thing that will save you, the Western medicine is the only thing that will save you. If you believe that something other than that could work, even if it has no scientific basis, could work for you, if you believed in it, if you actually wholeheartedly open yourself up and believed. And most of the time, as Westerners, people are far too cagey because they're unwilling to break what they've been told throughout their whole indoctrination coming up into this world. Anyway, there is, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all faith healing is good and sound and kosher. There is a lot of exploitation of people's money through faith healing, people paying for prayers, people paying for these trips to these kind of like radiated caves and so forth. But, you know, in 2004, there was a Newsweek poll that said that 72% of Americans believe that praying could cure someone, even if science said that whatever it was an incurable disease. So whether this makes you kind of like cringe a little bit, or you're like, hell yeah, regardless, many people in the Western world, America that is at least, do believe that there is a power beyond Western medicine, whether that just takes the form of prayer or it takes the form of all this ESP I'm mentioning. But if you take this in another way, then there is spiritual healing, which doesn't require divine intervention. In the case of Christianity and the Western belief, there is this divine intervention, which always is accredited to God. But then there is this whole other thing which gets less credit, which is that spiritual healing, which doesn't require any divine intervention. It might require divine energy, but this is a kind of alternate medicine that's been popping up, as I mentioned, Reiki, different ceremonies. People pray for other people, pray in quotes for other people during the sweat lodge in other forms than people associate with average prayers. And this is something that's becoming more and more of an interest to the scientific community, especially sociologists, between the relationship between one's religion and one's health, and how one's beliefs could extend their life, or vice versa, right? So, of course, the general health associations call all of this stuff pseudoscience and fakery. However, I'm going to play the cynic here. However, if there was proof to say that this is something that works, then wouldn't pharmaceuticals and for-profit healthcare systems vehemently try to bury proof of this? Wouldn't they do everything in their power to call this fake, right? Because that would be taking power or credit or money away from what they've invested themselves in. So, of course, where I'm coming from and my own biases and my own opinions, I'm saying I call bullshit here, but whatever. So moving on, I have to talk. I've got a few things left, but channeling, mediumship. This is what gets the Christians up in a furrow and the kind of normative people, like, but mediumship seems strange, right? People in communication with spirits as an ability of the human capacity. Of course, yet again, talked about this a lot during the first talk I did on spiritualism, but this is different here because I want to say everybody channels, whether you know it or not. People channel all the time. They don't realize it. So if you do an accent, if you do an impression, you are embodying a different persona, or you could call this a spirit. If you feel a very different way, say a sudden mood comes over you, this in a way, in a more subtle fashion, is channeling, okay? This is not weird. Now, in the Western world, there is classic cases, observed cases of people speaking other languages in their sleep, or people getting knocked in the head and speaking a different language that they don't know. This is channeling. This is mediumship. This is mundane. It is not necessarily that gawky stuff that people generally think is way more dramatic and way more faked because of what the fakery of the spiritualist movement did with it for money, okay? Glossolalia is when people under certain trances or in certain sacred medicines or even during their sleep will blabble or people don't know how to interpret what they're saying. They're speaking words that don't make sense. This is yet again a documented case of something inexplicable. This is channeling. Think of actors who completely jump into the roles of their characters and they don't break that character the whole time while they're filming. This is channeling. They are not themselves. When you say spirits, then people think it's like something big, something far gone and far unrelatable. But this is channeling. They are not themselves. And in an older world, they would be called possessed. Or they would be made into shamans. And as a poet, as a poet and someone who does free writing, this is where I bring it back. This is, you write something that is not true to your character. You embody something, you open yourself up to something, call it an intuition, call it a vibe, and you write something that is unrelatable to you. You use words that you don't even know that you know. You use phrases that you've never said. It is something very different to you as poets, as actors. Channeling is unquestioned. It's a part of what you have to do in order to do it. And it is not as far out there as common culture would assume. Okay, rant there over with. But the next one that I want to touch on, I think we got four more. Precognition or premonition and retrocognition or postcognition. The ability to perceive future events or the ability to supernaturally perceive past events. So the one that people relate to more is retrocognition. So sometimes this is how it's more mundane and this is how it's more relatable. Maybe you'll catch a smell of something and that smell brings you back to your childhood and you immediately remember in full detail something that you experienced as a child that if you had tried, you would not remember it in all that detail. This is retrocognition. Something triggers you and you can see something in more detail than you ever could have. You can call this supernatural, but it is actually very mundane. It is depicted as more blatant and as more supernatural when you have like a psychic in a TV show helping out the cops in trying to like figure out what happened at the murder scene, right? This is technically considered retrocognition. Now, precognition or premonition seems like the most foo-foo one. Somebody can see the future. However, people are more than ready to quote Nostradamus. People, no matter what religion you're in, are more than ready to quote Revelations, to quote the Vedas, to quote whatever religious text to see or to say that the end times are coming, or that the Bible said this, or that the Vedas said this. And in that way, you are admitting to ESP. You are saying that prophets or Nostradamus or people, regular mundane people, not just in the past, but you also have to admit that they are here now too, are capable of perceiving the future. Some people experience this in their dreams. They literally dream something that will happen. This is involuntary. They don't choose to do this. And as I mentioned before, I'm more skeptical of those who say that they can do this consciously. Crystal ball gazer styles. I'm skeptical. It's not to say that I'm not willing to say yes, but I'm skeptical. Whereas those that this has come to without asking and that they're actually freaking out because of it, I think this is genuine. I have seen this play out in my own life as a personal experience. So precognition, retrocognition, this would be all to say that maybe, just maybe, people can perceive the past and future in detail that shouldn't be possible by conventional standards. Okay, too much? Whatever. Many have attempted to do this. You will find this in astrology. They are not going to give specifics, but in astrology, you can talk about what happened in the past. You can talk about what will happen in the future with some general idea, but not specific ideas. For instance, Ronald Reagan had an astrologer who was accredited for saving Reagan from his assassination attempt because he called it ahead of time. Now, if Reagan believes it and the US government believes it, then you're a fool to not take it at least a little bit seriously. Okay. The next one is psychokinesis or telekinesis, or the ability to move objects with the mind. And I find this one funny because I think just about every kid in the world instinctively tries to do this, right? They're like staring and they put their hands on their head. They're like making their face red with how hard they're trying, right? There is a guy, and I'm not going to talk about this a whole lot, but the guy's name is Ted Owens. They call him the PK man. PK means psychokinesis. He claimed his ability was given by UFOs. I know, this is a lot to swallow already. And that his ability was as strong, has not been seen in the world since Moses parted the Red Sea. And mind you, that claim of Moses parting the Red Sea is an act of psychokinesis. So if you believe that, you believe in psychokinesis. So this guy, Ted Owens, or PK Man, has a whole book written about him, but he was accredited with so many coincidences, you know, to the point we had to take this seriously. And I want to say something right now. This is all parapsychology. This is an academic field. They study this stuff. And the idea in parapsychology is that you can't prove ESP through one occasion. You can only prove ESP through a bulk, tremendous amount of single occasions. That way you can't call it a fluke. So if one occasion is a stick, you can break that. But if many occasions are a bundle, you can't break that. That's the allegory here. So that plays into this case with Owens, because there were so many coincidences that you have to say that something else is going on here. The unknown is playing its cards. We do not know everything. Is that so much to admit? Okay. So this guy Owens says that 3 hurricanes will occur to his buddy. This guy's, you know, his buddy was just freaking out the whole time because whatever. Owens didn't like this guy who wrote a bad review about him. So he made this call. He said, there will be 3 hurricanes that will happen before June. And once June happens, on the west side of the states, and this guy that he doesn't like will be fired and will suffer, right? And lo and behold, even though June is a very rare time for hurricanes to happen on the West Coast, 3 of them did form, as he said, and that this guy is the guy that he didn't like. His name was Don Hurren. His life was in shambles, like he said. He was fired from the Inquirer, and his wife left him, and he was jobless. So, you know, this guy, Owens, kept writing to this other guy all these predictions. He said, you need to watch out. A hurricane's going to come and hit, where you're at in Florida. And then he's like, actually, you know what? I like you, so I'm going to protect you. And lo and behold, yet again, a hurricane forms, and it's moving on its way to Florida. And then once he gave his prediction, it started moving its way up to Georgia instead. So look into this if this is curious to you, because this guy, although his explanations of UFOs and all this is really hooey or really hard to accept, this is a very curious story, the PK man. Now, when it comes to making this more relatable to you as an individual, the idea of PK, of psychokinesis, is that you are manifesting things or moving things with your mind. This is where it gets more subtle. So your change of mentality, you can attract things into your life. You can attract people into your life. You can attract opportunities. In this way, you changing your mind, you setting an intention, makes things move, makes things change in manifestation, in materiality. Now, I would argue that anytime we do anything, it's technically psychokinesis. If I was going to move this computer, first thing I do is in my mind, I have the intention of doing so, and then my hands move. But first of all, my mind makes the decision, okay? This first happens in my mind. So technically, my mind is moving everything around us, every building, every street, everything that you've ever seen as an object that has been created has been first moved through the mind. If I look outside, and there are certain times in your life where you change how you look at things, where things don't look the same, where a type of growth or a type of maturity or something really strong happens to you and you don't see things the same, you don't see people the same. Your change of mind has transformed the environment, has transformed the material world that you participate in. I would argue this is a subtle form of psychokinesis, ESP. Okay, two last ones, and I know I'm pressing my hour here, but psychometry, the ability to obtain information about a person or object simply by touching it. Again, commonly depicted by psychics helping police in crime TV shows where they touch the murderer's blade and they suddenly know all these things about him. However, to make it more relatable, maybe someone you know, or maybe you, whenever they go to antique stores, they might touch something and they're like, no, I do not want that, right? And they can't say why, but for whatever reason, they have touched something and they have obtained information about it by touching it. Now, this is one that I relate to. As a child, whenever somebody around me would tell me that they're pregnant, I would make a game out of touching them on their gut, right? And predicting or guessing, however you want to look at this, the gender of the child. And I'll give you a specific case. A friend of mine, when I was 17, was pregnant. Early stages, she just figured out. And I instinctively, again, not consciously, but instinctively, involuntarily found myself putting my hand upon her gut. And I said, this will be a boy. I felt this to be 100% true. I can't tell you how, but I felt that. And then later on, she goes to the doctor for her checkup. And the doctor says, hey, this is going to be a girl. So she calls me up. She's like, ha ha, so much for that, right? And then lo and behold, the months later, she gives birth and it comes out a boy. And then I'm like, I could have saved you a doctor's visit. Why didn't you just believe me, right? So this, in my mind, is something that can be done instinctively, involuntarily, if you feel it intuitionally, naturally. I doubt to someone who would claim to do this purposefully. But hey, again, open to it. But that's the other form that historically has been written about many times over. So you'd think that there's something to this. Simply learning about something by touching it. The last one is telepathy. And again, this might seem hooey. This might seem like it's some X-Men stuff. But if you have ever genuinely connected with somebody, ever, whether it's romantic, if you're on, or platonic, if you're on the same level as someone, if you could talk about anything in the world, there comes a point where you already know what the other one is thinking. It's like twins, where a thought can pass between the two of you, where you already know what they're going to say, so they don't even have to say it, and they know that they don't have to say it. This might seem really mundane the way that I'm talking about it, but many people experience this thing where they're like, I feel like my brother's going to call me. The thought comes to your mind, and then lo and behold, an hour later, I'm getting a phone call. It's your brother. Sometimes people get the sensation that they know that somebody else, and they know exactly who, is thinking about them. And there's that kind of cliche where if you sneeze, somebody's thinking about you, right? People do experience this. They don't question this. And this is technically telepathy. So again, before I belabor on and on and on some more, I say, give this more credit than you might assume. Think about how it can be done mundanely, and then think about how it can be done very strangely, and then you decide what is true and what is not. So I've covered it all. I've given the whole array of the different parapsychological terms for different forms of ESP. So my one summative statement that I want to make here before I close is that, like I've been saying from the beginning, there is a tremendous amount of unknown. We do not know everything. Science, in all of its claims of nullifying, of underwhelming these miraculous and inexplicable, paradoxical, enigmatic events, should not be taken too seriously. There are things that happen without scientific explanation. There are capabilities of people that go beyond convention. There is a tremendous history, not only religious, but just plainly historical records of this stuff being involved in our ancestral history. We have forgotten. And by the standards of those who practice such things, or those who have experienced such things, the belief is that we have atrophied as people, that we have capabilities that we've let become weak to the point that we only experience such strange things as glitches, because we are not exercising those parts of our personhood because we don't believe they're there. So if I didn't believe my arm was an arm and I never used it because I didn't believe, it would become useless. And in this way, our extrasensory capabilities, which now we call extrasensory, but perhaps in the future will be very mundane, fully understood capabilities of powers that we have not been utilizing for quite a while. Okay. I hope that this talk has helped to shuffle and inspire the unknown in what is capable, and how you have potentially a lot more power in you than you have been led to believe. Okay.